Stripping down the layers to your inner core being. We all have this innate presence that resides deep within this authentic core of our being. But what happens is we go through life with all the stress and emotions that we're not processing that get internalized, and all that residue builds up inside of us. And as that happens, it creates this profound disconnect. We lose touch with that authentic core. And so, this article that I'm completing, and now a video I'm recording along with it, talks about how to get back in touch with this authentic core that resides deep within you. I'm Ben Ufana. And before we go further, I just ask one favor: look below, click like, subscribe if you haven't done so, and also be sure to share this video with anyone who you feel can benefit. As so many journalists, academics do, I will be reading from this article that I've written because there is so much depth and insight that I've included here, and it's more than anyone can possibly remember. We all encounter adversity in life, and for many of us, that adversity begins early in childhood, infancy, and even while still in the womb. Many of us experience abuse during childhood, whether from parents, siblings, school bullies, or other sources as we grow older. Then there's the stress of work, the wounds from the painful breakup, ghosting, rejection, divorce, heartbreak, and relational trauma that many of us were never able to fully process. Because we never learned to work effectively with our emotions, we internalize stress. Over time, the residue of everything we haven't fully felt or digested accumulates in our bodies, lodging itself in our cells, organs, and tissues. It deadens us, distorts the way we perceive the world, other people, and even ourselves. It alters our biochemistry, disrupts our hormones and neurotransmitters, and reinforces holding patterns that keep us trapped in cycles of painful reenactment. We disconnect from the authentic core of our being, that deeper presence that lives inside of us, that links us with a higher power. As that connection weakens, we lose access to the very source that can help us heal. Having suffered a great deal of trauma throughout childhood and adolescence, I carried deep attachment wounds into adulthood. Rejection and abandonment that felt so overwhelming, I often didn't know how to make sense of it. At the time, my understanding was limited. My perception of people in the world was distorted because I was seeing everything through the filter of my emotional wounding. The pain I felt in response to repeated experiences of abandonment, unrequited love in relationships blowing up on me was excruciating. Intuitively, I began to breathe softly and deeply while fully immersing my awareness in the depths of those all-consuming emotions, often continuing to do so for hours at a time. Yet at a certain point, I could feel the pain breaking open and coming out of my body in waves. Underneath that pain, I began to feel these powerful emanations of warmth flowing from within. As that happened, I felt a growing connection to the inner core of my being, an eternal part of myself that lives through all time, and to a higher power. As my attachment wounds began to heal, the pain lessened. Continuing to be guided by my intuition, I started making a concerted effort to face any issues, concerns, or challenges as they presented themselves. I would also breathe into any feelings or bodily sensations that arose in response. As I did so, I could sense that it was activating the innate healing intelligence residing within my body and mind. Emotions such as sadness, grief, frustration, and anger would take on a fluid quality, often softening and becoming more diffuse. After some time, I noticed that I also need to be working in a similar way with the more pleasant emotions, feelings such as joy, excitement, anticipation, and feelings of desire and attraction. As I continued to breathe from the depths of these feelings and bodily sensations as they arose, especially while doing so for extended periods of time, I could once again feel the connection to my inner core being and the higher power. I could also feel that it was awakening my mind's creative problem solving capabilities. And in many instances, I would come up with creative solutions to any challenges I was facing. I'll be moving through some of the sections of this article, so bear with me if it seems like I'm jumping from one thing to another. Now, although I loved many aspects of the culture and food and the deserts and mountains of northern New Mexico, I found it extraordinarily difficult to maintain a practice. Over time, I discovered many other practitioners, whether martial arts or yoga instructors, chiropractors, acupuncturists, and even conventional allopathic physicians were facing similar challenges due to the lack of follow through. So when the opportunity presented itself to work in New York City and Boston, I jumped at it. New York City was exciting in many ways, the thriving jazz and experimental music scenes, the energy, the people from every country on the planet. But I soon discovered that it could be difficult to form any kind of lasting or meaningful connection. People would often show up in my life only to disappear. At times, I'd meet someone spontaneously, get into a really animated conversation, and feel like I'd just made a new friend, only to never see or hear from them again. I'd be left afterwards thinking, what was the point of all that? With notable exceptions, I usually find it easier to relate to women than men, probably because I feel we have a lot more in common and a lot more to talk about. And I've had lots of platonic female friends over the years, classmates, professionals, stay at home moms, and spend a lot of time with them, often meeting for lunch, going for walks, stopping by their homes, and sometimes staying over when I traveled across country or spending time abroad. Wherever I went, I would often engage with the women I encountered. While I very much wanted to have someone in my life I could partner with, I approached each interaction with an openness, asking myself, what kind of connection does this want to be? I stayed open to romantic possibilities, yet I was also totally fine if it turned out we were simply meant to be platonic friends. Having lived in parts of the Midwest and the desert Southwest, I found people to be much more open, trusting, and emotionally available. Yet in New York City, I encountered a guardedness among many women, a kind of mistrust or suspicion. And some of that is certainly justified, given the horrible experiences so many women have had with men. But it also seems to have a lot to do with mindset and culture. While some might argue that it's just the nature of living in a densely populated urban environment, I've spent lots of time in cities and other parts of the country and around the world, including places that were far more dangerous than New York City, and still found more openness. And I also found that women in those places were more in touch with their intuition. There are also times like during the financial crash of 2008 and 9, when the banksters, those white collar criminals in the financial industry that tanked the economy and the bottom fell out from under so many of us, I was in full on survival mode, scrambling to find enough work just to make ends meet. And I didn't feel I could afford to leave New York City. What also kept me anchored was my training with Shifu Li Tailiang in the internal martial arts of Xing Yi Quan and Baguazhang. As hard as things were, I knew I had a rare opportunity. And despite how much I was struggling in the city, I didn't want to walk away. There were many instances during those years when I would meet women spontaneously in the city and fall into these long, open conversations, moments where they were letting down their defenses and genuinely opening up. We'd often exchange contact info, and I would follow up with a thoughtful text or voice message. And then nothing. They'd vanish despite my efforts. I couldn't seem to establish any kind of meaningful or lasting connection, and it left me with this painful, empty void. To cope with the profound sense of loneliness I felt, I just kept breathing into that void. In many ways, I feel like it was the only thing that kept me sane during those years. As I kept breathing into that painful, lonely void, I could often feel the presence of my inner core and the higher power. And I had to rely on this presence to sustain me because I certainly wasn't getting my needs met otherwise. It was during that time that my intuition led me to India and Sri Lanka. And although it was challenging in many ways, I somehow managed to create a life on two different sides of the planet. Other than a few friends, I never did form any meaningful, lasting, romantic, or platonic connections in the city. Yet, I've been in two serious relationships over the years with women I've met in Sri Lanka and have formed numerous other lasting connections there. Ever since coming out of COVID lockdown in 2020, I've been traveling a lot more. And I still make a concerted effort to be open and engaging wherever I go, including during my time in New York City. Yet, despite my efforts, connection here often feels elusive. I see couples everywhere I go, on the street, in cafes, on the train. But for me, those kinds of moments have only shown up briefly, if at all, in the city. Maybe I'm just not on the right wavelength here. Maybe the rhythms or pace or vibe doesn't sync with mine. Thankfully, in other places I've been spending time, there's a greater sense of continuity, more openness, more presence, and more the meaningful connections I've been longing for. During the height of the COVID-19 lockdown, the world as I knew it, like it did for so many others, fell out from underneath me. For many years, I've been teaching classes on a weekly basis while also maintaining a practice, working with people individually. Suddenly, I found myself at my mom's place in northern Idaho with all this time on my hands and not quite sure what to do with myself. Rather than waste inordinate amounts of time scrolling through social feeds, consuming news, or binging on documentaries, I made a decision. I was going to do at least 3 hours of intensive daily meditation practice. For years, I found it difficult to get the people I work with to consistently do the practices I've taught them. Maybe they'll do 15 or 20 minutes here or there, or only when they're actively working with me. And that makes my job so much harder because their bodies and minds are more armored and they're often holding a great deal of stagnation. On the other hand, those who commit to a consistent daily practice, an hour or more, show up very differently. Their bodies and minds are far more malleable and therefore much more responsive to the healing work. As a result, they progress at a much faster rate and experience far more powerful outcomes. Even though I had been practicing consistently, I wasn't getting quite as deep. But when I extended my practice to 3 hours a day during lockdown, I could feel myself descending through successive layers, accessing emotions and thought processes that had long operated outside of my conscious waking awareness for years, if not decades. I was finally accessing the underlying forces that had been driving my own habitual limiting patterns of thought and action. And yet, as I continued with the extended practice, I could feel so much of that dissolving. These parts of myself were becoming more fluid, initiating new cycles of growth. And not only that, as I kept working my way down, dissolving these successive layers, I could feel the authentic core of me and my connection to a higher power growing stronger. While sitting in meditation For such extended periods, I would often encounter a great deal of resistance. It would show up as restlessness or boredom, or just a general difficulty sitting still. My body would tense up in places, and I would find myself opening my eyes to check to see how much time had passed. But over time, I started bringing as much awareness as I could to all these expressions of internal resistance, fully immersing myself in the discomforts as they arose. The tightening in the back of my neck, upper back, and shoulders were signs that the stress and unresolved emotions were surfacing. As I continued to breathe into those places for extended periods of time, the tension would begin to soften. The emotional body armor would begin to dissolve. The more I stayed with this process, the more I could feel myself breaking through successive layers of numbing. Parts of me that had long been unconscious, operating outside of my conscious awareness, began to stir. And over time, they continue to wake up. In those moments, I feel something else, something deeper begin to emerge, a comforting presence, emanations beginning to flow from deep within. As that happens, I can feel the authentic core of my being growing ever stronger. Even though lockdown is fading further and further into the rearview mirror, I've continued to practice for extended periods of time, mainly because I find my practice goes so much deeper and becomes far more powerful. There's something about staying with the process for long stretches that allows me to access deeper layers of my being. Sometimes when I sit for extended periods, the emotions rise like steam from deep within. And at other times, it feels as though the molecules in my body are spreading out, like my whole being is oscillating. There's often a rawness, a kind of nakedness, as though I've shed layers of stress and stagnant emotion. I become more sensitive, more attuned, and the more I strip away those layers, the more I clear the stagnation from my body and mind. My senses are sharpened. I feel lighter, less weighed down, and more capable of acting on my goals and navigating life's challenges. As these parts of me heal and become more integrated, functioning as a cohesive whole, I find myself becoming more powerful, more effective, and more resourceful. And I really like the feeling of aliveness it brings and the sense that I'm continually evolving. And it doesn't mean I don't continue to face challenges in my life, because I most certainly do. But I make a concerted effort to take whatever life brings and to use it to facilitate my continued healing and growth. Stripping down the layers to your inner core being is more than just emotional processing and meditation. What you eat also plays a major role in either revealing or burying that core. If you're living on garbage, refined sugars, processed food, pop, you're not just feeding your body junk, you're sedating yourself. Smoking, alcohol, and other recreational drugs, and many of the medications people rely on, only compound the problem. These substances dull emotional sensitivity, create stagnation within your body, and disconnect you from your core. They keep you inflamed, foggy, and emotionally reactive or numb, and spiritually flatlined. You might be doing the work to heal, but if your body is overloaded with toxicity, you're constantly pushing uphill. I see it all the time in the people I work with, and I've experienced it in my own body. Cleaning up your diet is an important part of clearing stagnation. It makes it far easier for you to access your feelings, process your lived experiences and emotional responses, and reconnect with who you really are beneath the avoidance, stagnation, and emotional armor. When you stop numbing and start feeding your body the nourishment it actually needs, whole foods, clean proteins, healthy fats, vibrant fruits and vegetables, you gain clarity. Emotions begin to move more freely through your system, and you begin to become more capable of doing the deep inner work. The foods you consume either support the life you're here to live or drag you further from it. They can strip away the layers of numbness or reinforce them. Two essential questions to ask yourself: are the foods I'm eating facilitating my healing? Or are they sedating me and the emotions and realities I'm avoiding? Another powerful practice I've found to strip away the accumulated layers of stress and emotional residue and internal clutter is through fasting. The foods we consume, especially the heavy processed and other emotionally deadening varieties, often act like a kind of glue or cement, holding stress and emotions in our cells, tissues, and organs. They can dull our awareness and make it harder for us to access the deeper layers of our emotional body. There have been times when I've gone on water fast, and it's during these periods that so much of what I've been carrying, unprocessed emotions and current and older stresses, buried memories, suddenly become more accessible. As the veil dissolves, I'm able to feel and see more and go much deeper into meditation. The silence becomes more alive. My mind becomes clearer, and I'm able to digest the impressions of my lived experiences, along with the fragments of grief, fear, and a lot of other emotions and stresses I didn't know I was still holding on to. Despite the hunger, there's often a sense of heightened awareness and sensitivity, a deepening connection to my inner core being and the higher power. It strips away the noise, the cravings, the restlessness, even the discomfort. All of it becomes part of the practice. And when I stay with it long enough, I could feel something sacred breaking through the surface. The traumatic wounds we carry often run extraordinarily deep. Add to that the reality that so many of us are living in survival mode, working and commuting long hours, struggling just to make enough money to cover our basic living expenses, let alone save for retirement. We're dealing with intense work-related stress while also facing all kinds of challenges in our relationships, whether it's with the person we've partnered with or the difficulty we face in forming any kind of meaningful, lasting connection. So many of us aren't getting our basic needs for love and companionship met. And while we suffer immensely because of it, we just keep pushing on. And now with smartphones and digital media, it's even worse. We're constantly flooded with information and stimulation. Our systems are in sensory overload. We can't process what's coming in, so it stays trapped in our bodies. It dulls our awareness and affects how our brains function, and it keeps us even more disconnected from the authentic core of our being. The practice I described of acknowledging what's happening and noticing what we're feeling in response, and then breathing softly and deeply while fully immersing our awareness in the depths of our feelings and bodily sensations that arise is crucial. It helps us to digest our lived experiences and emotional responses. Considering the challenges so many of us are facing and the toll it's taking on us, we need to be making time to work with this practice every single day. In fact, consistent daily practice mitigates much of the wear and tear while replenishing our bodies and minds. With that said, there are limits to what the body and mind's innate healing intelligence will do on its own. That's why I encourage you and everyone to stay open, experiment with different therapeutic practices, and continue with those that prove to be most effective. For many years, I've relied heavily on deep tissue bodywork, partly because it frees so much of the stress and emotions that have been trapped in my body. As these stresses and emotions begin to surface, I'm able to process them using the same practice I described earlier. The most powerful of all the interventions I've done are the sessions I receive from gifted healers and the Vision Quest, a traditional Native American practice that involves fasting alone in the mountains for 4 days and nights with no food or water. During the vision quests, at times I can feel an extraordinarily powerful presence descending into my body. As that happens, I often find myself reliving past trauma and other stressful life events, along with the emotions attached to them. I can feel the same presence working within me, enabling me to digest both the lived experiences and all the stresses and emotions, while also rebuilding me from the inside out, creating a much stronger and healthier foundation. In the midst of it all, I can feel the authentic core and the presence of a higher power residing deep within, growing ever stronger. It's important for all of us to embrace life as it presents itself to the best of our ability. That's not always easy. Life can be stressful, often evoking a wide range of emotions, many of which are not so pleasant. But our lived experiences, along with our emotional responses, they stir within us and need to be thoroughly digested. When we do that, we transform them into fuel for our continued growth. We facilitate this process by bringing our awareness to the feelings and bodily sensations that arise in response to our experiences. And as I said earlier, it's also essential we make use of the most effective therapeutic interventions, especially for the healing we cannot do on our own. By doing so, we not only build a stronger internal foundation, we become the living embodiment of the authentic core that has always resided deep within us. Having trained with a traditional Native American doctor, a medicine man from the Kiowa tribe, and having gone through so many vision quests, I work as the conduit, as so many indigenous healers have for centuries, allowing an extraordinarily powerful presence to work through me to facilitate healing within people's bodies and minds. During the individual sessions, you're able to digest your lived experiences and all the emotions attached to them. This process helps you to build a much stronger and healthier foundation, gain clarity and insight, and develop greater resilience, along with the inner resources needed to fulfill what you're here to do in this lifetime. With each session, you become more of the embodiment of the authentic core that resides deep within you. If you feel called to do this work, click on the link to send a message or call me directly at 332-333-5155. And again, if you haven't already done so, be sure to look below and click like and subscribe. And do share this video. It helps me to reach those individuals who truly do need to hear this message.